They say money can buy anything, comfort, luxury, even silence, but at 30,000 feet, there is nowhere to run. When a wealthy socialite decided that her first-class ticket gave her the right to physically assault a young girl over a reclined seat, she thought the world would take her side. She was wrong. In seconds, the cabin went from silent to frozen in horror. But what she didn't know was who that girl actually was. By the time the wheels touched the ground, instant karma wasn't just a phrase, it was a life sentence. You won't believe how this ends. The humid air of Miami International Airport clung to the passengers as they shuffled through the jet bridge, but inside the cabin of Flight 4022, bound for New York, the air was crisp, cool, and smelled faintly of expensive leather and sanitizer. Mrs. Eleanor Sterling adjusted the collar of her Chanel blazer, her eyes scanning the first-class cabin with the scrutiny of a health inspector looking for a violation. Eleanor was a woman who wore her wealth like a suit of armor. Her platinum blonde hair was sprayed into an immovable helmet, and her fingers were heavy with diamonds that caught the overhead cabin lights. She didn't just walk down the aisle, she patrolled it. "Excuse me," she snapped at a flight attendant who was organizing the beverage cart. "My pre-departure champagne. It's been—" She checked her diamond-encrusted watch. 3 minutes since I sat down. Is the service always this sluggish on this airline? I apologize, Mrs. Sterling. The flight attendant, a young man named David, said with a strained smile. We are just finishing boarding. I'll have that for you momentarily. Eleanor huffed, sinking into seat 2A. She pulled out her phone, ready to type a scathing complaint to her husband, a high-powered real estate attorney who had people for these kinds of inconveniences. As she tapped away, a shadow fell over her. Eleanor looked up, her lip curling slightly. Walking past her was a young black girl, no older than 19. She was dressed simply in a grey hoodie, noise-cancelling headphones around her neck, and carrying a worn canvas backpack. She looked tired, her eyes downcast, clutching her boarding pass tightly. Eleanor watched as the girl stopped at seat 2B, the aisle seat right next to her. The girl checked her ticket, then looked at the seat, then back at the ticket. She moved to stow her backpack in the overhead bin. "Excuse me?" Eleanor's voice was sharp, cutting through the low hum of the engines. The girl paused, holding her bag mid-air. She pulled one side of her headphones down. "I'm sorry?" "I think you're lost, dear," Eleanor said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness that barely masked the venom underneath. "Economy is that way. Back past the curtain. This is first class." The girl, whose name was Chloe, looked at Eleanor with a calmness that seemed to irritate the older woman instantly. "I know. My seat is 2B. Eleanor blinked, her face flushing slightly. "Let me see that." She didn't wait for permission. She snatched the boarding pass from Chloe's hand. She scanned it, desperate to find an error. "Seat 2B, first class, full fare." Eleanor shoved the ticket back at Chloe. "Well, system errors happen, I suppose. Just try not to encroach on my space. I have work to do." Chloe didn't respond. She simply placed her bag in the bin, sat down, and put her headphones back on, closing her eyes. To Eleanor, this silence was an insult. She was used to fear, to deference, to people scrambling to please her. This girl's indifference felt like a slap in the face. Eleanor shifted in her seat, jamming her elbow onto the center console, claiming the armrest territory aggressively. "Unbelievable," Eleanor muttered loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. A businessman in 3A glanced over, looking uncomfortable, but quickly looked away. "They just let anyone up here now. Probably used miles, or an employee pass." David returned with the champagne. Here you go, Mrs. Sterling. It's warm, she accused, barely touching the glass. It's chilled to 40 degrees, ma'am. Take it away. I don't want it anymore. And tell me. She pointed a manicured finger at Chloe, who was looking out the window. Why is the cabin so crowded? I thought I purchased a premium experience, not a seat on a city bus. David's patience was thinning. The flight is fully booked, ma'am. Please fasten your seatbelt. We are pushing back. As the plane began to taxi, the vibration of the engines seemed to rattle Eleanor's nerves. She glared at Chloe. The girl was peaceful, quiet. Too quiet. Eleanor felt a rising tide of irrational anger. She felt she deserved to sit next to someone of her own stature, not this teenager in a hoodie who ignored her. The fasten seatbelt sign dinged off as they reached cruising altitude. Chloe, exhausted from a long connection, reached for the recline button. Her seat eased back a few inches. "Hey!" Eleanor shrieked. Chloe jumped, eyes snapping open. "What? What happened?" "You nearly crushed my drink," Eleanor lied. Her tray table was empty. "Do you have any respect for personal space? Sit your seat up. Now." "I didn't touch your tray," Chloe said, her voice shaking slightly but firm. "I just reclined. It's allowed." "I don't care what is allowed." Eleanor unbuckled her seatbelt and loomed over the girl. "I paid $3,000 for this seat. I will not have you in my lap. Sit. It. Up." "No," Chloe said quietly. "I'm tired. I'm going to sleep." She turned her head away, putting her headphones back over her ears. That was the moment Eleanor Sterling snapped. The rejection, the defiance, the audacity of this girl to ignore her. It was too much for her fragile ego to handle. "Don't you turn your back on me!" Eleanor screamed. The cabin fell dead silent. The low murmur of conversations ceased. The clinking of silverware in the galley stopped. Every head in first class turned toward row 2. Eleanor didn't care about the audience. She was blind with rage. She reached out and grabbed Chloe's headphones, ripping them off the girl's head. The plastic band snapped with a loud crack. "Hey!" Chloe yelled, scrambling to unbuckle her seatbelt, her hands raised in defense. "Don't touch me!" "You listen to me, you little brat!" Eleanor threw the broken headphones onto the floor. "You don't belong here. You think because you scrounged up a ticket you can treat me like dirt?" "Ma'am, sit down." It was the businessman from 3A. He was standing up now, alarmed. But Eleanor was past reasoning. She saw Chloe's hand reach for the call button to summon the attendant. Eleanor slapped her hand away, hard. "I am talking to you." Chloe, realizing the danger, tried to slide out into the aisle to escape. "I'm moving," she said, her voice trembling. "Let me out." "You aren't going anywhere until you apologize." Eleanor blocked the aisle with her body. She grabbed Chloe by the shoulder of her hoodie and shoved her back into the seat. The force of the shove caused Chloe's head to snap back, hitting the hard plastic casing of the window frame with a sickening thud. "Ah!" Chloe cried out, clutching her forehead. "Mrs. Sterling, stop!" David, the flight attendant, came running from the galley, dropping a stack of napkins in his haste. Eleanor didn't stop. Seeing the girl cower seemed to fuel her dominance. She grabbed Chloe's arm, her nails digging into the skin. "Look at me when I speak to you." Chloe tried to push her away. "Get off me." Eleanor raised her hand, the one heavy with diamond rings, and swung. It wasn't a slap. It was a backhand, fueled by the full weight of her body and her entitlement. The rings connected with the skin above Chloe's eye. The sound was awful, a wet, sharp smack that echoed through the small cabin. Chloe gasped, falling back into the seat, her hands instantly covering her face. When she pulled them away a second later, blood was streaming down from a gash above her eyebrow, dripping onto her grey hoodie, turning the fabric dark crimson. "Oh my God!" a woman in row 4 screamed. For a second, Eleanor stood there, panting, her hand still raised, her chest heaving. She looked at the blood. In that split second, the reality of what she had done should have hit her. But Eleanor Sterling didn't feel remorse. She felt justified. "That," Eleanor hissed, pointing a shaking finger at the bleeding girl, "is what happens when you don't show respect." But the silence that followed wasn't the silence of submission. It was the silence of a predator entering the room. David, the flight attendant, tackled the situation with a fury he didn't know he possessed. He physically stepped between Eleanor and Chloe, using his body as a shield. "Do not move," he commanded Eleanor, his voice dropping an octave. "Do not take another step." "She provoked me," Eleanor screeched, adjusting her blazer as if she had just disciplined an unruly dog. "Did you see her? She ignored me." Chloe was weeping now, holding a napkin to her head that David had handed her, the white paper turning red instantly. She looked small, terrified, and young. "Ladies and gentlemen," a booming voice came from behind. The cockpit door had opened. Captain Robert Hayes stood there. He was a man of few words, an ex-Air Force pilot with 30 years of flying experience. He had heard the commotion through the interphone. He took in the scene in a single glance. The terrified girl bleeding in seat 2B, the broken headphones, and Eleanor Sterling standing in the aisle, looking indignant rather than ashamed. Hayes didn't yell. He walked up to Eleanor with a stride that made the floorboard seem to vibrate. "You," Hayes said, pointing at Eleanor. "Sit in seat 2A. Keep your hands on your lap. If you move, if you speak, if you so much as blink in a way I don't like, we are going to have a very different conversation." "You can't talk to me like that," Eleanor scoffed, though her voice wavered. "Do you know who my husband is? I don't care if your husband is the President of the United States," Hayes said, his voice like cold steel. "You just assaulted a passenger on my aircraft. That makes you a threat to the safety of this flight." He turned to David. "Get the restraints. Now." The color finally drained from Eleanor's face. "Restraints? You can't be serious. I'm in first class." "Not anymore," Hayes said. "Now you're a federal liability." As David returned with the zip-tie restraints, the entire cabin watched. No one looked away. The businessman in 3A had his phone out, recording everything. The woman in 4B was doing the same. Eleanor realized the camera lenses were pointed at her. "Stop that! You can't film me! This is illegal!" "Put your hands behind your back," David ordered. As the plastic cuffs cinched tight around Eleanor's wrists, she looked at Chloe. The girl was being tended to by a doctor who had come up from economy. "You're going to pay for this," Eleanor spat at the girl, even as she was being forced down into her seat. "My husband will sue you for everything you have. You hear me? You're nobody." Chloe lowered the bloody napkin. Her eye was swelling shut, but she looked Eleanor dead in the face. "I wouldn't be so sure," Chloe whispered. The captain returned to the cockpit. The fasten seatbelt sign turned on, but the plane wasn't continuing to New York. The plane banked sharply to the left. The flight map on the screen in front of Eleanor flickered. The destination had changed. They were diverting, and Eleanor Sterling had no idea that the nobody she had just beaten was about to bring her entire world crashing down. The announcement from the cockpit was brief and icy. "Flight attendants, prepare for immediate arrival." The aircraft, a massive Boeing 777, usually destined for long hauls, banked sharply, the engines roaring as they fought against the wind. They weren't landing in New York. They were descending into Raleigh-Durham, the nearest major airport capable of handling the situation. Inside the first-class cabin, the atmosphere was suffocating. Eleanor Sterling was still zip-tied to her seat, her face a mask of furious disbelief. She twisted her wrists against the plastic cuffs, wincing as they bit into her skin. "This is kidnapping!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You are hijacking me. I demand to speak to my lawyer right now." "Ma'am, for the last time, remain silent," David said. He was sitting in the jump seat, facing her, his expression stony. He wasn't serving drinks anymore. He was guarding a prisoner. Across the aisle, Chloe was silent. A doctor, a kind-faced woman named Dr. Aris, who had been sitting in row 5, was holding a compress to Chloe's head. The bleeding had slowed, but the swelling was nasty. Chloe's eye was already turning a deep, angry purple. She stared out the window, watching the ground rush up to meet them, a single tear tracking through the dried blood on her cheek. "You're doing great, honey," Dr. Aris whispered. "Just breathe. We'll get you to a hospital as soon as we land." "I just wanted to sleep," Chloe whispered, her voice barely audible. "I have a recital tomorrow. My cello. It's in the hold. I hope she didn't hurt my hands." She looked down at her hands, long, slender fingers, the hands of a musician, trembling in her lap. "Your hands are fine," Dr. Aris assured her. "But that woman is going to wish she never touched you." The wheels hit the tarmac with a violent jolt, followed by the heavy shudder of braking. As the plane taxied, it didn't go to a gate. It stopped in a remote section of the tarmac, far away from the terminal. Outside, the flashing blue and red lights were already visible. Not just one police car. 6 of them, and 2 black SUVs. Eleanor craned her neck to look out the window. "See?" she scoffed, a manic glint in her eyes. "My husband called them. He sent a security detail to get me off this plane. You people are in so much trouble." The fasten seatbelt sign flickered off, but Captain Hayes's voice boomed over the intercom immediately. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. No one stands up. We have law enforcement boarding the vessel." The cabin door opened. The rush of humid North Carolina air filled the plane. 2 officers in standard airport police uniforms entered first, followed by 2 men in dark suits with badges on their belts. Federal air marshals. Eleanor smirked. "Finally, officers, over here. These employees have assaulted me." The lead marshal, a tall man with a buzz cut and a face carved from granite, ignored her completely. He walked straight to David. "Is the situation contained?" "Yes, sir," David said. "Suspect is in 2A. Victim is in 2B. The marshal turned his gaze to Eleanor. He didn't look impressed. He looked bored, which was infinitely worse. He walked over to her, pulled out a pair of heavy steel handcuffs, and nodded to David to cut the zip ties. "You're making a mistake," Eleanor hissed as the plastic was snipped. She rubbed her wrists, flashing her diamonds. "I am Eleanor Sterling. My husband is Armand Sterling of Sterling and Associates. If you touch me, he will have your badge." The marshal didn't blink. He spun her around with practiced efficiency. Click, click. The sound of real metal handcuffs locking was heavier, more final than the zip ties. "Eleanor Sterling," the marshal said, reciting the words by rote. "You are under arrest for federal assault aboard an aircraft, interfering with a flight crew, and battery. You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it." "You can't arrest me!" Eleanor screamed as he hauled her up by her arm. "She attacked me. She's the one who doesn't belong here." As they dragged Eleanor down the aisle, a strange thing happened. The passengers in first class didn't look away. They looked right at her. "Shame on you," the businessman in 3A said clearly. "Disgusting animal," the woman in 4B muttered. Eleanor thrashed, her heels scuffing the carpet. "Shut up, you're all jealous. I'm the victim." They pushed her out onto the jet stairs, but the drama wasn't over. As the marshals led Eleanor down to the waiting squad car, the lead marshal stopped. He turned back to the plane. Another man had boarded. He wasn't police. He was wearing a suit that cost more than Eleanor's car. He looked frantic. He scanned the cabin until his eyes landed on Chloe. "Miss Cross," the man said, rushing to her side. Chloe looked up, dazed. "Yes." "I'm Special Agent Milton, from the Diplomatic Security Service. Your father was alerted the moment the distress signal went out. We are here to take you to the hospital." Eleanor, who was being shoved into the back of a police cruiser on the tarmac below, caught a glimpse of this through the open door. She froze. Diplomatic Security Service? Why would a girl in a hoodie need diplomatic security? A seed of true, cold fear finally planted itself in Eleanor's stomach. The holding cell at Raleigh-Durham International Airport was nothing like the first-class lounge. It was a grey, windowless box that smelled of stale coffee and floor wax. Eleanor sat on a metal bench, her blazer rumpled, her mascara slightly smudged. She had been processed, fingerprinted, and stripped of her jewellery. Her diamonds, her armour, were in a plastic baggie signed by an evidence clerk. She was pacing, waiting for her phone call. She was furious, yes, but the adrenaline was fading, replaced by a gnawing anxiety. The way those officers had looked at her, it wasn't the usual deference she received. It was contempt. Finally, the door opened. A tired-looking officer handed her a phone. "You get one call. Make it count." Eleanor snatched the receiver. Her fingers trembled as she dialed Armand's private line. He picked up on the first ring. "Eleanor? Where the hell are you? I've been trying to track the flight. It says diverted." "Armand!" Eleanor sobbed, the dam finally breaking. "It's a nightmare. They arrested me. Some little hoodlum in first class attacked me, and the crew took her side. I'm in a cell in Raleigh. You need to get the jet. Get down here and fix this. Sue the airline. Sue the police. Sue everyone." There was a silence on the other end of the line. A long, heavy silence. "Armand?" "Eleanor." Armand's voice sounded strange, tight, strained. "Did you hit someone?" "I told you she provoked me. She was rude. She reclined her seat. She wouldn't listen. I just taught her a lesson." "Eleanor," Armand roared, the sound causing her to pull the phone away from her ear. "Shut up. Just shut up and listen to me." Eleanor blinked, stunned. Armand never yelled at her. "Have you seen the news?" Armand asked, his voice shaking. "I'm in a cell, Armand. Of course I haven't seen the news." "There is a video," Armand said, speaking quickly, panicked. "A passenger filmed it. It's everywhere, Eleanor. Twitter, CNN, Fox. It has 5 million views in 2 hours. They are calling you the mile-high monster. The video... God, Eleanor, you backhanded a child. It's in 4K resolution. There is no spinning this." "It's out of context," Eleanor cried. "They don't know what she did. It doesn't matter," Armand screamed. "But that's not the worst part. Do you have any idea who that girl is? She's nobody. She was wearing a hoodie. She probably used points." "That nobody," Armand said, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper, "is Chloe Cross." "So, who is Chloe Cross?" "Eleanor, think. The last name. Cross." Eleanor paused. The name sounded familiar, but she couldn't place it. "Her father is Nathaniel Cross," Armand said. Eleanor gasped. The air left her lungs. Nathaniel Cross wasn't just a rich man. He wasn't just a CEO. Nathaniel Cross was the fiercest, most feared federal prosecutor in the Southern District of New York before he retired to become a senior advisor to the White House on civil rights. He was a man who ate billionaires for breakfast. He was known in legal circles as the Hammer. Armand Sterling, a real estate attorney who dealt with zoning laws and contracts, was a guppy compared to the great white shark that was Nathaniel Cross. "Oh no," Eleanor whispered. "It gets worse," Armand continued, sounding like he was about to vomit. "Chloe is a prodigy cellist. She was flying to New York for a solo performance at Carnegie Hall. a performance for the United Nations. You didn't just hit a girl, you assaulted a cultural ambassador's daughter hours before her debut. Eleanor sank onto the metal bench. The cold from the steel seeped through her Chanel skirt. "Armand, fix it," she pleaded weakly. "I can't fix it," Armand snapped. "My partners are already calling. They want to distance the firm from us. The board is meeting right now. Eleanor, Nathaniel Cross just gave a press statement. He didn't yell. He didn't scream. He just said 2 words: maximum sentencing. You are facing 20 years, Eleanor. Federal prison. Not a slap on the wrist. Prison." "But I'm wealthy," she stammered, clinging to the only reality she knew. "Not anymore," Armand said. "I'm hanging up. I have to call a criminal defense specialist. Don't speak to anyone. Don't say a word." The line went dead. Eleanor stared at the phone. For the first time in her life, the checkbook in her mind came up with a balance of 0. Meanwhile, in the airport VIP medical suite, the scene was very different. Chloe was sitting on a plush sofa, an ice pack taped to her head. The swelling was bad, closing her left eye completely, but she was calm. The door opened, and a tall man stormed in. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing a rumpled button-down shirt, sleeves rolled up, looking like he had run all the way from the tarmac. It was Nathaniel Cross. He had been in D.C., a short flight away, and had commandeered a helicopter the moment he got the call. "Chloe." He rushed to her, falling to his knees beside the sofa. This man, who made corrupt senators tremble, looked like he was about to cry. He gently cupped her face, looking at the bruise. "Daddy, I'm okay," Chloe said softly. "You are not okay," Nathaniel said, his voice trembling with a dark, dangerous rage. "Who did this? Where is she?" "The police have her," Agent Milton said from the corner. "She's in holding." Nathaniel stood up, his face hardened into the expression that had sent dozens of organized crime bosses to prison. He turned to Agent Milton. "I want the video," Nathaniel said. "I want the witness statements. I want the flight manifest. And I want the name of the finest federal prosecutor in North Carolina on the phone in 5 minutes." "Already done, sir," Milton said. "Daddy," Chloe said, grabbing his hand. "My cello. Is it okay?" Nathaniel looked at his daughter. Even after being beaten, she cared more about her music than revenge. It broke his heart and fueled his fire at the same time. "We checked it. It's safe," Nathaniel said. "But you can't play tomorrow. Not like this." Chloe set her jaw. It was the same stubborn look her father had. "I am playing. I practiced for 3 years for this. I am not letting some hateful woman steal my moment. I'm going to New York." Nathaniel smiled sadly. "Okay, we'll go. But first I have one stop to make." "Where?" "I need to look Eleanor Sterling in the eye," Nathaniel said. "I want her to know exactly who she started a war with." The fluorescent lights of the interrogation room buzzed with a low, irritating hum that felt like it was drilling directly into Eleanor Sterling's skull. She had been sitting there for 3 hours. No water, no food, just the cold metal table and the 2-way mirror that reflected her own disheveled image. The Chanel blazer was wrinkled, her hair had lost its volume, and without her jewelry, she felt naked. She was waiting for her high-powered legal team. Armand had promised to call the best. She expected a phalanx of suits to burst in, threatening the police, demanding her release, and handing her a latte. Instead, the door opened, and a single man walked in. It wasn't a lawyer. It was Nathaniel Cross. Eleanor didn't know his face from TV, but she knew his energy. He walked into the small room, and it suddenly felt like all the oxygen had been sucked out. He was dressed in a charcoal suit that fit him like a second skin, but his tie was loosened and his eyes were burning with a cold blue fire. He didn't sit down. He stood by the door, arms crossed, staring at her. "Who are you?" Eleanor demanded, though her voice lacked its usual bite. "I want my lawyer. You can't be here." "My name is Nathaniel Cross," he said. His voice was terrifyingly calm. It was a deep baritone that vibrated through the table. "I am the father of the girl you decided to use as a punching bag." Eleanor's mouth opened, then closed. She remembered Armand's warning. The hammer. "She was disrespectful," Eleanor stammered, falling back on her only defense. "She invaded my personal space." Nathaniel took one slow step forward. Eleanor flinched. "I have watched the video, Mrs. Sterling," Nathaniel said softly. "I watched you berate my daughter. I watched you destroy her property. And I watched you strike her in the face while she was cowering in her seat." He leaned his hands on the table, looming over her. "Chloe is 19. She has never hurt a fly. She spent the last 3 years practicing 6 hours a day for tomorrow's concert. And you decided your comfort was worth more than her safety." "I didn't know who she was," Eleanor cried out. "If I had known—" "That," Nathaniel cut her off, his voice finally rising to a crack of thunder, "is exactly the problem. You didn't think she mattered. You looked at a young black girl in a hoodie and decided she was trash. You decided she was something you could discard." He stood up straight, adjusting his cuffs. "I am not here to yell at you, Mrs. Sterling. I am here to give you a courtesy notification." "Notification?" Eleanor blinked, confused. "I have spoken to the district attorney. Because the assault happened mid-flight, federal jurisdiction applies. But because we are on the ground in North Carolina, the state also wants a piece of you. You are being charged with assault with a deadly weapon." "Deadly weapon?" Eleanor shrieked. "I used my hand." Nathaniel's eyes dropped to her hand, where the heavy diamond rings usually sat. A heavy ring, applied with force to the temple, is considered a deadly weapon in the eyes of the law. If you had hit her an inch lower, you could have blinded her. An inch higher, you could have caused a brain bleed. He walked to the door. "My lawyers aren't defending me, Mrs. Sterling. I am activating the Victims' Rights Advocate Network. We are going to ensure you don't get bail. You are going to spend the weekend in the county jail. General population." "No!" Eleanor stood up, panic seizing her. "Armand won't let this happen. He knows the governor." Nathaniel paused at the door and looked back. A cruel, small smile played on his lips. "You haven't checked your phone, have you? They took it away." "What about Armand?" "Armand issued a press release 20 minutes ago," Nathaniel said. "Sterling and Associates condemns all acts of violence and discrimination. He stated that he is deeply disturbed by the allegations against his wife and is cooperating fully with the investigation." Eleanor froze. "He's distancing himself?" "He's throwing you to the wolves to save his firm," Nathaniel said coldly. "You're all alone, Eleanor. Welcome to the real world." The door slammed shut, leaving Eleanor alone, with the buzzing light and the crushing realization that her life was over. While Eleanor was being processed into an orange jumpsuit that smelled of mildew, a far cry from her silk blouses, Chloe Cross was sitting backstage at Carnegie Hall in New York City. It was the next night. The bruising on her face was horrific. Her left eye was swollen shut, the skin a mixture of black, purple, and green. A butterfly bandage held the cut on her eyebrow together. "Chloe," her instructor, Professor Holloway, said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to do this. We can reschedule. The committee understands." Chloe looked at her reflection in the dressing room mirror. She looked like a prize fighter who had lost a bout, not a classical musician. But then she looked at her hands. Her fingers were unhurt. "No," Chloe said firmly. "She wanted to make me small. She wanted to put me in my place. If I don't go out there, she wins." "The audience, they will stare," Holloway warned. "Let them stare," Chloe said. She picked up her bow. When Chloe walked onto the stage of Carnegie Hall, the applause was polite, standard. Then she stepped into the spotlight. A gasp rippled through the audience. The cameras zooming in for the live stream caught the damage in high definition. The blackened eye, the swollen cheek. Chloe didn't hide it. She didn't turn her face away. She sat down, adjusted her cello, and looked out at the dark auditorium. She began to play Elgar's cello concerto in E minor. It is a piece full of sorrow, of anguish, and of deep, resounding power. And Chloe played it like she was possessed. She poured every ounce of pain, fear, and humiliation from that plane ride into the strings. The music wept and screamed. Back in North Carolina, in the recreation room of the county jail, the TV was on. A group of inmates were playing cards, but one of them turned up the volume. "Damn!" a woman with a neck tattoo said. "Look at that girl's face. Someone messed her up bad." Eleanor Sterling was sitting in the corner, huddled in her oversized orange jumpsuit, trying to be invisible. She looked up at the screen. She saw Chloe. She heard the music. And she saw the ticker at the bottom of the news screen. Virtuoso plays on. Chloe Cross performs hours after Viral Plane Assault by socialite Eleanor Sterling. "Hey," the woman with the tattoo turned around, squinting at Eleanor. "Ain't that you? The lady from the news, the one who beat up the kid?" The room went silent. 6 women turned to look at Eleanor. Eleanor shrank back against the cinder block wall. "No," she whispered. "That's not me." "Yeah, it is," another inmate said, standing up. "You're the rich bass who thinks she owns the sky." Eleanor realized then that Nathaniel Cross hadn't just ensured she stayed in jail. He had ensured everyone knew exactly why she was there. The trial of the people versus Eleanor Sterling began 4 months later, but the verdict had essentially been delivered by the court of public opinion on day 1. The courtroom was packed. Reporters from every major network jostled for space. The public gallery was full of supporters for Chloe, people wearing T-shirts that said, "Seat 2B" and "Hands off." Eleanor sat at the defendant's table. The transformation was drastic. Gone was the platinum helmet of hair. Her roots were showing, grey and limp. She had lost 20 pounds. Her face was gaunt, etched with the stress of a woman who had lost everything. Armand was not there. The divorce papers had been served to her in her cell 3 weeks after the arrest. Citing irreconcilable differences and a breach of the morality clause in their prenuptial agreement, Armand had cut her off. He had frozen their joint assets. Eleanor was being represented by a court-appointed public defender, a young, overworked man named Mr. Garris, who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. Opposing him was the district attorney himself, flanked by a team that Nathaniel Cross had helped advise. The trial was brutal. First came the video. It was played on a massive screen for the jury. The audio was crisp. Eleanor's voice, shrill and entitled, "I will not have you in my lap." Then the slap, the sickening sound of the ring connecting with bone. The blood. Eleanor couldn't watch. She stared at her hands, the hands that were now bare of any diamonds. Then came the witnesses. David, the flight attendant, testified. "She was aggressive from the moment she boarded," he told the jury. "She treated the victim like she was invisible, then like she was a contagion. It wasn't about the seat. It was about power." Captain Hayes took the stand. "I have flown for 30 years. I have never seen a passenger act with such unprovoked malice. She endangered the safety of my flight. But the nail in the coffin was Chloe. When Chloe took the stand, the courtroom went silent. The physical wounds had healed, leaving only a faint, thin scar above her eyebrow. But the emotional weight was palpable. "Can you tell the court how this incident has affected you?" the DA asked gently. Chloe took a deep breath. She looked directly at Eleanor. For the first time in months, their eyes met. Eleanor expected to see hate. Instead, she saw pity. "I used to love flying," Chloe said, her voice steady. "I loved the idea of going somewhere new. Now, when I step on a plane, I can't breathe. I look at people's hands. I wonder if the person next to me hates me just because I exist." She paused. "Mrs. Sterling didn't just hurt my face. She tried to take my dignity. She assumed that because I was young, and black, and dressed in a hoodie, that I didn't have a voice, that I didn't have a father who loved me, that I wasn't worthy of the space I paid for." Chloe leaned into the microphone, but she was wrong. I am worthy, and no amount of money or first-class tickets makes her better than me. The jury was crying. Even the bailiff looked moved. Then, against the frantic advice of her public defender, Eleanor insisted on testifying. She thought she could charm them. She thought she could explain. It was a disaster. "I was stressed," Eleanor said from the stand, her voice wavering. "My husband was pressuring me. The champagne was warm. I snapped. I didn't mean to hurt her that bad. I just wanted her to listen." "You wanted her to obey," the DA corrected her on cross-examination. "Isn't that right, Mrs. Sterling? You felt she should obey you because you are a wealthy woman in a Chanel blazer, and she was a girl in a hoodie." "Well, there is a societal order," Eleanor slipped, her old entitlement leaking through. "One expects a certain decorum in first class." The gasp from the gallery was audible. The jury's faces hardened into stone. Eleanor realized too late what she had said. She had just confirmed every accusation against her. The closing arguments were short. Mr. Garris tried to plead for leniency based on Eleanor's mental distress. The DA simply pointed at the scar on Chloe's face in the photo evidence. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. "We find the defendant, Eleanor Sterling, guilty on all counts," the foreman read. "Guilty of assault with a deadly weapon. Guilty of interference with a flight crew. Guilty of federal battery." Judge Harrison, a stern woman who had no patience for entitlement, looked over her glasses at Eleanor. "Mrs. Sterling, you have lived a life of privilege. You thought that privilege was a shield that allowed you to treat others as less than human. Today, that shield is shattered. I sentence you to 8 years in federal prison," the judge declared, "followed by 3 years of supervised release. You are also ordered to pay restitution to the victim in the amount of $500,000. Eleanor's knees gave out. 8 years. She would be 60 years old when she got out. As the bailiffs moved to handcuff her, standard steel cuffs, no diamonds this time, she looked back at the gallery, searching for anyone. Armand? A friend? Anyone? The benches on her side were empty. On the other side, Nathaniel Cross put his arm around Chloe. They stood up and walked out of the courtroom, heads held high, into a sea of flashing cameras. Eleanor was led out a side door, into the shadows. But the story wasn't quite over. Fate, it seemed, had one final twist of the knife for Eleanor Sterling. The Federal Correctional Institution in Aliceville, Alabama, was less a building and more a suffocating blanket of humidity and despair. For inmate 89402B, formerly known as Eleanor Sterling, the transition from the climate-controlled penthouses of Manhattan to the stifling heat of the Alabama lowlands had been a physical shock from which she had never recovered. 6 months had passed since the gavel fell. 6 months of a 12-year sentence. In her previous life, Eleanor's mornings began with a silk sleep mask and a bell to summon her housekeeper. Now, her mornings began at 5 a.m. with a harsh buzzer and the guttural shouting of a guard named Officer Griggs. "Bunks tight, inspection in 5. Eleanor rolled off her thin, lumpy mattress. Her body ached with a persistent, dull throb. The concrete floors were unforgiving on her joints, and her hands, once her pride and joy, always manicured in ballerina pink, were now red, raw, and tipped with jagged, broken nails. She looked at them often, a roadmap of her downfall. She was a pariah in D Block. The hierarchy of prison was brutal, but simple. You were respected for your crime, your strength, or your hustle. Eleanor had none of these. The story of her assault had preceded her. The other inmates, many of whom had faced systemic injustice their entire lives, viewed the wealthy socialite who beat a black teenager over legroom as something lower than vermin. They didn't beat her. They didn't have to. They just erased her. They looked through her. They called her first class, with a sneer that stripped the words of any luxury. "Move it, first class," a large woman known as T-Bone grunted, shouldering Eleanor into the doorframe of the communal bathroom. "You're blocking the air." Eleanor didn't fight back. The fight had left her months ago, drained away by the endless appeals Armand's lawyers, no, her public defenders, had lost. That Tuesday, the routine broke. "Sterling, warden's office, now!" Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. The warden never called for inmates unless it was bad news. Was it Armand? A flicker of delusional hope sparked in her chest. Maybe he found a loophole. Maybe he's coming to get me. She was marched across the yard, squinting in the harsh sunlight, to the administrative block. Warden Milton was a man who looked like he was carved out of granite. He didn't look up when Eleanor entered. He continued typing for a full minute, letting her stand there in her oversized, sweat-stained orange jumpsuit. "Sterling," he finally said, leaning back. "We have a new directive from the Bureau. Rehabilitation through the arts." Eleanor blinked, confused. "Sir? A donor has provided a substantial grant to build a music therapy wing for the facility. We've received a shipment of instruments, violins, cellos, a baby grand piano." The word cello hit Eleanor like a physical slap. She flinched. "We need a dedicated maintenance detail," Milton continued. "Someone to clean the room, polish the wood, set up the chairs for the classes, and ensure the humidity controls are monitored. It's solitary work, precise work." "I don't know anything about maintenance," Eleanor stammered. "I hired people for that." "Exactly," Milton said, a cold smile touching his lips. The donor's stipulation for the grant was specific. They requested that the maintenance position be filled by an inmate who needed to learn, and I quote, "the value of service and the weight of silence." He tossed a set of keys on the desk. "You start today. Don't scratch the varnish, Sterling. It costs more than your former life." The assignment was torture. For weeks, Eleanor spent 12 hours a day in the new music wing. It was a beautiful room, soundproofed and smelling of fresh pine and expensive wood polish. It was the closest thing to luxury she had seen in months, yet being there made her sick. Every time she picked up a rag to polish the curve of a cello, her hands shook. The smell of the rosin triggered a visceral flashback. She could hear the snap of Chloe's headphones. She could feel the vibration of the plane. She could see the blood dripping onto the grey hoodie. In the silence of that room, Eleanor couldn't escape herself. She scrubbed the floors until her knuckles bled, trying to scrub away the memory, but it was indelible. Then came the day of the dedication ceremony. The prison was buzzing. Rumors flew through the cell block that Big money was coming. The press would be there. "You will stay in the back," Officer Griggs instructed Eleanor, shoving a mop bucket into her hands. "You are part of the scenery. You do not speak. You do not make eye contact. You wipe the floor if someone spills water. That is it." Eleanor nodded, keeping her head down. She was positioned in the shadows near the emergency exit, a grey ghost in an orange suit. The double doors opened. Camera flashes illuminated the room like lightning. First came the warden, beaming. Then the mayor. And then the guests of honor. Eleanor squinted against the glare. When her vision cleared, her breath hitched in her throat so hard she nearly choked. It was Chloe Cross. She looked like a vision. She was wearing a cream-colored dress that floated around her ankles, simple, yet undeniably elegant. Her hair was braided in a crown around her head. But it was her face that mesmerized Eleanor. The bruising was gone. The swelling had vanished. The scar above her eyebrow was faint, a thin white line that looked less like a wound and more like a mark of survival. She held herself with a regal poise that Eleanor had tried to buy for decades, but never possessed. But Chloe wasn't alone. Walking beside her, offering her his arm with a gallantry that made Eleanor's knees buckle, was a man in a bespoke navy suit. It was Armand. Eleanor grabbed the handle of the mop to keep from falling. It was Armand, but not the Armand she had left. He looked younger. He was tan, fit and smiling, a genuine, warm smile she hadn't seen directed at her in 10 years. He leaned in and whispered something to Chloe, and the girl laughed, a musical, light sound. He's with her. The thought shattered Eleanor's mind. My husband is with the girl I hit. The warden stepped up to the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Today marks a new chapter for Aliceville, and none of this would be possible without the extraordinary generosity of the Cross Foundation and their new strategic partner and primary benefactor, Mr. Armand Sterling. The room applauded. Armand nodded humbly, patting Chloe's hand. Something inside Eleanor snapped. It wasn't the anger of the plane. It was pure, unadulterated grief and confusion. The wall of reality she had built to protect herself crumbled. "Armand!" The scream tore from her throat before she could stop it. It was raw, guttural, and echoed horribly in the acoustic-perfect room. The applause died instantly. Every head turned. Eleanor stumbled forward, knocking over the bucket. Soapy water spilled across the pristine floor. "Armand, it's me! It's Eleanor! Why are you with her?" Officer Griggs was moving toward her, but Armand held up a hand. The room froze. Armand Sterling turned slowly. He adjusted his cufflinks, the ones Eleanor had bought him for their 20th anniversary. He looked across the room at the disheveled, frantic woman with grey roots and wild eyes. He didn't look angry. He didn't look sad. He looked blank. He turned to Chloe, his voice carrying clearly in the silent room. "My apologies, my dear. The staff here seems a bit unstable." Eleanor froze, just feet away from them. "Unstable? Armand, I'm your wife." Armand looked at Chloe, raising an eyebrow. "Do I know this woman, Miss Cross?" It was the ultimate dismissal. He wasn't just ignoring her. He was rewriting history. He was severing the last tether Eleanor had to the world of the living. Chloe looked at Eleanor. For a long, stretched second, the two women locked eyes. Eleanor pleaded silently for mercy, for recognition. Chloe's expression softened, but not with forgiveness. It was pity, the kind of pity one has for a wounded animal that cannot be saved. "No, Armand," Chloe said, her voice steady and clear, ringing like a bell. "I don't think you do. That's just the help. The help." The words hit Eleanor harder than the prison sentence. It was the echo of her own prejudice, returned to her with the force of a tsunami. She was the one in the uniform now. She was the invisible one. "Get her out of here," the warden hissed. 2 guards seized Eleanor by the arms. As they dragged her backward, her heels skidding through the soapy water she had spilled, she didn't scream anymore. She just stared at Armand. He had already turned his back. He was guiding Chloe toward the brand-new Steinway piano. "Shall we christen the room, my dear?" Armand asked. "Let's," Chloe replied. As the heavy doors swung shut, sealing Eleanor out in the hallway, the muffled sound of music began. It was the opening notes of Elgar's cello concerto, mournful, deep, and hauntingly beautiful. Eleanor slumped against the concrete wall, the music vibrating through the bricks against her spine. She sat alone in a puddle of dirty water, listening to the girl she tried to silence play a song of victory, funded by the husband who had erased her. In the end, Eleanor Sterling had been right about one thing. Class really does separate people. She just never realized she was the one who lacked it. So, what is the lesson here? It's simple, yet brutally often forgotten. Character is the only currency that matters. Eleanor Sterling believed that her wealth gave her the right to treat others as obstacles. She mistook a quiet girl in a hoodie for a target, failing to realize that dignity doesn't wear a price tag. In the end, the plane landed, but Eleanor never truly came back down to earth until she hit the cold concrete of a prison cell. Fate has a funny way of balancing the scales. You never know who you are sitting next to. You never know whose life you are touching or hurting. In a world where you can be anything, be kind. Because if you choose to be cruel, you might just find that the universe has a very first-class seat waiting for you, right next to the karma you deserve. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to share this with a friend who needs a reminder about instant karma, and subscribe for more dramatic stories every week. See you in the next video.